But my beats, they are hard.
Welcome back to the BCSN SportsWrap. Brian Fulford here, and having a conversation with Craig Haley, the Perform FCS Senior Editor at Athlon Sports, as well as FCS Football. Craig, it's a pleasure to have you on. It's a pleasure to have a conversation with you and talk about FCS football and the MEAC and SWAC from a national perspective. How are you doing today?
Doing real well. It's exciting to be on with you, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah. So first off, let me ask, how are you, your family, your coworkers, associates doing with COVID and things like that? I always like to ask.
Doing well. I mean, there are no good solutions out there right now, and then we're taking it one day at a time, and then all healthy. That's the important part, and just keep plugging away at what we do. So
right.
I hope you're doing well, you and your family and friends.
Yeah, we're surviving, doing well. Everybody's good so far. So, I'm thankful for that, definitely. It's been interesting to see the college football season from not just as someone who loves the game, but also as someone who, trying to cover the game. And I've only been in it for a minute or a little bit, but you've been in depth in it for several years. What's this season been like for you, or maybe either a personal or just even from a journalism perspective?
It's been difficult, as you know. I mean, this would be my 11th year full-time covering the FCS year-round, and obviously we're not having a full season this fall. No SWAC and MEAC, and hopefully in the spring we will. The part about the FCS is it feels like family to me. I mean, all the schools are so approachable. You're on top of the action. The fans love it. It just feels like family, and to not have it this fall is definitely a little disappointing. At the same time, you got to do, make the best of it. It's definitely a different feel. I keep saying that, it feels like forever since we've talked X's and O's. I mean, all we talk about is off the field issues and not actual on the field issues.
I've got to admit, I'm a bit disappointed in the way that the NCAA has sort of, I feel like, managed this. But then again, I have to remember that the NCAA is really made up of college presidents. How would you describe the way things have been handled, maybe from the group? And we talk about the FCS group. Obviously, it's a little bit different on every level, but from the FCS and even on down, how would you categorize or describe how things have been handled from the NCAA level?
Sure. I think a lot of people are a little disillusioned with the NCAA led by, Mark Emmert, the president. I think all along the FCS level and just really college athletics was looking for direction from the NCAA and waited, and when finally the NCAA made some decisions, they basically put it all on the conferences to do it themselves, and it made it a little bit hard as well, with all their protocols and necessary, of course. But I just think the NCAA, people thought there would be direction sooner, and really just left it up to the conferences to decide what they were going to do here moving forward. Yeah,
and I will admit, full confession, I think I have gone back and forth on whether they should play, shouldn't play. I think every month I've changed my thoughts as I've seen things happen. If you care to share, or however what are your thoughts, should they play, should they not play? I know that's a loaded and sometimes a tough question to answer. Where do you kind of stand on that line?
I just think the environment that's out there right now, it's probably just too much danger for transmission of coronavirus. I think that conferences have made the right call not playing their league seasons. It took 5 full weeks before everybody get to that same point. 6 of the 13 FCS conferences have allowed for non-conference games. I do think that's a mixed message because you're basically saying, and these are the school presidents who make those decisions in the conferences, they're saying, hey, we don't feel it's safe enough to have a league season, but you go ahead and have a non-conference season, a limited amount of games, obviously. But to me, it seems like it's being said that way so schools can have FBS opponents and get that big payday. I just think it's a little bit of a mixed message right now.
Yeah. A couple of the conferences, obviously the MEAC and the SWAC, and I was sitting here trying to remember who was first. Actually, I don't even think they were first. I think maybe the conference out in California might have been one of the first conferences to postpone play, but when the MEAC and probably maybe right after the SWAC decided to make their decision, they were I guess the Ivy League probably made their decision maybe before.
But the MEAC and SWAC were definitely in the first 5 or 6 overall on the FCS level out of the 11 conferences. I think they made the right call, and I like how they're the only 2 conferences in the FCS right now that actually have given out their spring plan and how to make it work. Obviously, everybody's working on their plan, but to have it out there and to have a timetable and as players and coaches be able to see that vision and know where you're headed, I think that makes it easier for those 2 conferences. I like what the 2 conferences have done here, announcing their plans.
When those conferences made those decisions, Ivy, MEAC, SWAC, I don't know what was the perception, or maybe what were the thoughts of other conferences? I mean, I have a feeling that, obviously those 3 conferences aren't heavily involved in the playoffs. So I don't know if other conferences kind of looked at that as kind of scoffed at it a little bit and said, oh, well, they're not in the playoffs anyway. So, it is what it is. But what were you hearing on your end?
I think everybody in football was going to do everything they could to make this work. It wasn't, they were going to push the deadline and take it up to the end. The deadline almost being the start of preseason camp in early August. I think when those conferences announced, I'm sure, other FCS conferences didn't want to, say publicly, we're probably headed in the same direction, but they probably knew it, a lot of them. So even if you held out, you knew that you probably weren't going to have enough time to make this work. I think, yes, I mean, fans' perspective, they looked at it as, yes, those conferences don't participate heavily in the playoffs, so they were still hopeful from a fan perspective that there'd be a full season, there'd be 24-team playoff, and it just started happening. It was like dominoes, 5 weeks of 13 conferences making the same decision, more or less.
Yeah. You mentioned it earlier, the SWAC came up with a plan, and even, they were probably one of the first conferences to actually give a detailed plan of what they were going to do. And then most recently, they released a schedule of conference games. When you looked at that schedule in terms of the dates and things of that nature, what are your thoughts on that?
I like it because you have 6 weeks of games, more or less, unless they add a non-conference game, but 6 weeks really over a 9-week period. So that gives you bye weeks, and that's what most people thought about this fall, that schedule some bye weeks, because if there is an outbreak, if people test positive, it gives you time as a school to regroup, maybe get those players, back to being well again and then testing negative again during that time away from the field. So I like the 6 games and 9 weeks plan. I like, I do like the conference championship games, and obviously the MEAC has one now. It probably leaves open the possibility of both conferences maybe getting in the playoffs, because the playoffs could work 16 if it's 16 teams and starting the second weekend of May. with both the MEAC and SWAC having their championship games on the 1st. If you start the 8th, the only thing is if the playoffs are 16 teams and those two conferences want in, I don't know if it can work that it would only be 16 teams, because at that point too many conferences would have automatic bids. It would be 12 at that point, and really not enough at-large teams. So even though both teams are hopeful of maybe having the champion go to the playoffs, it just may not work, especially if it's 16 teams in the spring.
Yeah, so I know the NCAA has not released any type of dates, and I think they had a meeting last week to actually acknowledge that, yeah, we're looking at playing in the spring. Have you heard anything in terms of a spring date?
It's I think the feeling is Memorial Day weekend would be the championship game. It's a late Memorial Day as well. I think it's going to be a little while before we actually get that bracket kind of dates, because it has to go through different committees. And the FCS committee is going to drive this. They're going to want playoffs. They're going to want to make this work. It'll happen as long as there's a spring season. It's just a matter of, will we have a spring season? Everybody's hopeful, but we were also hopeful of a fall season, and it didn't quite happen. So, the first thing is we got to get it solved as a nation medically, and then hopefully we'll go back to some normalcy. So I think it'll be a little while before we'll get the dates. But, again, it should happen as long as there's a season.
And you brought this up in one of your recent articles I read talking about teams playing in the fall. And I've said this as well. When the first idea was pitched about spring practice or spring games, I thought about the words that a lot of people were using was the health and safety and concerns. And I kept saying to myself, you're talking about health and safety is a concern, but at the same time, you want to turn around and play in the spring and potentially play again in the fall. What are you hearing? What are your thoughts when you think about that kind of schedule?
Well, that's the next big issue. I mean, the first one being what we said earlier is that, why are we having non-conference in the fall for some schools if the health and safety is the number one priority? I do think perhaps if you go deep into the spring, deep playoff runs, say, you're going to have to adjust how you do this. It may not affect every school because some schools won't be in the playoffs and will be done by the end of April. So that helps them a little bit. I think you have to adjust the off-season activities, those dates, maybe start a little later, than usual for camp for the start of the regular season. I think you're going to have to make that adjustment if we're really going into late May for some of these schools.
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting to see how we were talking recently that with the SWAC and the MEAC both putting their championship games on May 1st, they actually left an open date the week before, and we were kind of theorizing that, well, let's just say if the NCAA comes out with the schedule, they could possibly move the championship games up a week to like April 24th, and then it kind of opens the door for playing in May. And then we got to talking about, well, what are you going to do on Mother's Day weekend? And it's like, oh man, I don't know how you're going to figure all that stuff out. The scheduling guides, tough job. I was, as it relates to spring ball, it seems like if the NFL goes ahead with their season, they're not likely to change their plans in the spring. And it kind of brings up the idea that you're going to have some guys miss out. I mean, I just recently read, obviously on the FCS level, Trey Lance, I believe, the quarterback, North Dakota State, they're playing, which is amazing to me. They're playing a showcase game, essentially. I love the way how you phrase that. It's a showcase game. But you're not going to see him in the spring. Over in the SWAC, it'll be interesting to see if you see guys like Akil Glass, the quarterback for A&M, Jermaine Martin, and Mac McCain, two guys over at A&T who have been All-Americans in your rankings and things of that nature. What are your thoughts on the big name players sitting out the spring so that they can concentrate on getting drafted or those combine opportunities?
It's a great topic, Brian. I think if you're really, a serious prospect and do have hopes of making it, you probably have to pull away and do the pre-draft buildup, the training at these training facilities, hopefully a combine or a pro day. We saw what happened this past year where there was a lack of pro days because schools shut down with the pandemic, and an all-time low, 6 FCS players were drafted. That was half of the previous all-time low. So not having pro days, really hurt the FCS. You probably can't have that happen again next year. These scouts do want to see you up close. They want to get their timings and measurements and everything, not just relying on game film. So I do think, yes, we're going to miss some key players in a spring season, provided there's one. And it's not an easy call, but, individually, it's probably what you have to do if you have that NFL aspirations.
Yeah, it'll be real interesting to see where that line is because, like you said, a lot of FCS guys actually the first player didn't get drafted until almost in the 6th or 7th round last year. And so the numbers aren't real high. Occasionally you'll get a 1st or 2nd round guy, but it's a lot at stake for those big name guys. Let me transition a little bit over to the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, who, 50 years of football in the FCS level, and they've had a tough summer. They have taken it. They have taken it on the chin with the recent departures of Florida A&M, Bethune-Cookman. July 1 of 2021, they also lose North Carolina A&T. When you see what's happening in the MEAC, what are your thoughts on that conference's, I hate to say survivability in the FCS level over the next few years? Yeah,
I think it's going to take some time for them to get back to the level it's been on. Those are, on top of Hampton even. The 3 that they're about to lose are just key players, on a football level, A&T, Bethune, FAMU. You just can't overcome that in a long period of time, let alone a short period of time. I think they're going to have to, probably draw somebody up from the Division II level. You don't want to be as low as 6 teams. And I don't think there's any reason to continue the MEAC SWAC challenge in the 2021 season. 6 schools in the MEAC football versus 13 in the SWAC. It's just not strong enough in my eyes. And even the Celebration Bowl takes a hit. I think Dr. Thomas is excellent, but at the same time, he's got a problem on his hands and he needs to solve it. If there's a positive right now, I liked what they announced in their plan for the spring season. They came out and showed you how they do it without a lot of travel, without flights. Now the 2 divisions are so mumuch different. The northern one is just so much weaker than the southern division. But I guess you couldn't get around that. The southern division is loaded, but I think, it's a problem they need to solve. And from a alumni and fan perspective, people want answers quickly. So I think they really need to move fast and try and at least get 2 more back to like 8 football schools. Yeah, that when they broke that up into 2 divisions, that South Division with FAMU, Bethune, A&T, Central, North Carolina Central, and South Carolina State. That's the 5, probably the 5 favorites. Yeah. That would have gone into this fall. At least 4 of the 5 easily. So that is definitely loaded. That's going to be a knockdown drag out. To see how that happens. You mentioned some, in terms of expansion opportunities. You mentioned Division II, and I know that can be difficult because of the finances that go with it. Are there any FCS schools? We were doing the math. There are not too many FCS independents, or, are there any fits among other FCS programs that might fit the footprint for the MEAC? Well, independents, no, because the ones that are on the East Coast are actually, ready to move into conferences. The ones that don't have conference affiliations going forward are much farther west. Geographically, I mean, schools in the Big South are aligned geographically, but their conference has gotten stronger, so there's no reason for them to leave there. No, I do think unless you have a team moving up or just a startup program, a school with a startup program, that's where you got to have your focus, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask you about polls and the polling on a national level, because I know I saw the Stat FCS preseason poll is going to be released soon. I know that's always a sore point for HBCU FCS fans. I have a thought about that. And it has to do more so with winning games outside of, whether it be other HBCUs or other Division II, but it's like winning those games against, for example, the SWAC has a bad record right now against McNeese State, for example. Mm-hmm. When we talk about, an HBCU versus what we call the PWIs, the number and the wins are very low. I mean, North Carolina A&T has won some games, but very few schools are winning those, matchups. What's the national perspective from voters when it comes to, I know North Carolina A&T and FAMU will probably get some votes, but overall, what's going to have to happen to see more of those schools in the SWAC, MEAC, make it into maybe the top 10 preseason or rise up in the early part of the polls?
Sure. I think North Carolina A&T has separated itself from a national, standpoint that their perception. I mean, they've gone out and, beaten those three FBS programs in recent years. They have some nice wins against like Elon during the regular season. I think people value them, voters, and value is not the right word, but perceive them on a higher level just because of all the Celebration Bowl titles, the MEAC titles, and rightfully so. I think overall, the MEAC's been stronger than the SWAC in recent years, but the MEAC, if you look back to what they've done in the FCS playoffs, they've lost 19 or 20 straight games. That hurts. And the SWAC not having been in the playoffs since, Southern in 97, and before that, Arrow McNair. I mean, it's been a while. And I think from a voter perspective, I think people want to see those kind of opportunities, realized, and then, wins coming out of it. So I do think A&T has been a little bit different and than the other HBCU teams. I think what you mentioned, though, like say for last year, South Carolina State, beat up on Wofford to start the year and basically trailed Wofford in the poll, even afterwards. So I can understand the frustration, but I do think the MEAC losing streak in the playoffs does hurt the overall case.
Mm-hmm. And does when you've looked at over the past decade or longer, maybe even over the past 20 years, what would you say, what have programs like James Madison, North Dakota State, I'm trying to go here off the programs, Jacksonville State, Eastern Washington, the teams that are constantly making it into the playoffs, what have they done that – I'm just going to say, what have they done? Because it seems like they've made that transition of consistent success that, as you said, the MEAC hasn't been able to do. MEAC teams, outside of that brief time span where FAMU and Coach Billy Joe had some success in the playoffs, they really haven't had much outside of that. Of course, we haven't seen the SWAC in the playoffs for over 20 years. What have those type of programs, done to sort of separate themselves?
Well, I think recruiting-wise, you do have the MEAC and SWAC may lose players to those kind of schools because they go to the playoffs. That may factor in. I do think those schools you mentioned, some of the bigger ones, JMU, North Dakota State, when they're playing a lot of the schools during the regular season and even the playoffs, they're playing them at home. The MEAC and SWAC schools, to go out and win those non-conference games, a lot of times they have to do it on the road. So there's a little unfairness there. But, facilities all across the nation have just risen. What the schools can afford to pay their coaches are probably higher, outside the HBCU programs. That factors in. I tell you what, we're talking playoffs a lot, but I love the Celebration Bowl. I think both conferences made the right decision in going to that. Now, yes, it may hurt the overall perception because they're not in the playoffs, but I think the lack of recent success in the playoffs indicates, hey, let's do the Celebration Bowl. So I'm all for that, to be honest with you. I just think it'll be hurt when the MEAC drops the 6 teams come next July.
Yeah, one of the things that's always talked about is the finances, and that playing into the playoffs sometimes creates a deficit versus in the Celebration Bowl, whoever those 2 teams are, there's a positive, there's a surplus, and that also is going to the schools and conferences. So I think that's one of those arguments. Like you said, you haven't had a lot of success, and then you're actually paying sometimes where financially it hasn't been. I guess if I'm trying to find the right word, it hasn't been a win-win to go to the playoffs, so to speak. It's almost like you got to keep winning. You got to put a few wins up before it really means something,
Yeah, and SWAC and MEAC schools in the playoffs would, there's a good chance they might go on the road. Not, the first round is actually based on a bid where the host school can be the team that bids the most. And some of the better SWAC programs do draw enough fans that they could win a bid and host. But again, if you're on the road, yeah, it's not a win-win financially.
Yeah. How would you, last thought about polls, I've been trying to theorize and wrap my mind around how a spring playoff would work, because if everybody's playing conference schedules and maybe with one non-conference, how might seeding, or how might you determine your top 16, if it's a 16, for a playoff, if you've got 13 conferences mostly playing conference schedules?
Well, if it drops to 16, it's going to hurt with the at-large bids. I mean, right now, in a typical year, 14 schools are getting in with at-large bids. If that drops significantly, the field won't be as strong. You won't have as many blowouts because, in my estimation, but at the same time, because you'd be getting the better at-large teams. But again, I think it's going to depend on the direction they go. But all the indications are it won't be 24 teams, that's for sure. But
so it'd be more conference champion. It'd be more like, hey, every conference champion plus if you got 13 conferences or 12. If it depends on what the Ivy does, and
Ivy won't be in. They just, their presidents just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
But
so if the MEAC and SWAC join, you end up with 12 possibly.
That's too many, I think. I mean,
really? Okay.
I mean, in my eyes, that it works out. Yeah, if the playoffs start on May 8th, it works out for the MEAC and SWAC. I just don't think it leaves enough at-large teams. There's going to be a big backlash if a very good, and if we're talking an 8-game spring or a 7-game, if a team's like 6-1, 6-2, and played in a tough conference and doesn't get in, and that may happen a lot, that there's going to be a lot of backlash saying, why aren't we having more at-large bids?
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting to see how the NCAA plans that. Before we let you go, I know you've been gracious with your time. Right there behind you, over your left shoulder, that beautiful poster there, FCS Awards, and the Buck Buchanan Award. The 25th anniversary was 2019. And you guys always do a great job with those awards. Just remind the people again the different categories, because you have a lot of SWAC legends are named, for those awards.
Yeah, thank you for letting me talk about it. Yes, I mean, I have the poster of Buck Buchanan over my shoulder because if I was a quarterback, he'd be coming up behind me and sacking me. We know that. So this past year in January, on the eve of the FCS championship game, every year we hold the Stats Perform holds the national banquet for the top individual awards. The Buck Buchanan did celebrate his 25th year for the Defensive Player of the Year. Georgia Buchanan comes and presents. There's been some great SWAC players. Chris McNeil from NCAA and T1. Rasheem Mathis was a former winner. We had the Walter Payton Award, which is the biggest one in the FCS in my eyes. I mean, that's the Offensive Player of the Year. We mentioned Trey Lance earlier. He won that and actually swept it the Jerry Rice Award as well, the Freshman of the Year. Going back to Steve McNair for the Walter Payton, Walter Dean from Grambling State won way back when. We also present the Eddie Robinson Award, which is just as old as the Walter Payton Award. Eddie Robinson for Coach of the Year. Henry Frazier won that from Prairie View. That's already, that was our 33rd year this past banquet, and eventually we added the Doris Robinson for the Scholar Athlete in the FCS. So all 5 awards are named for SWAC greats. It's just, Dr. McClellan came 2 years ago to present the Eddie Robinson. We've had great people, Doug Williams, Walter Payton's son, Jared presents. I mean, Everson Walls has presented. We've had some, Doug Williams, if I didn't mention him. I mean, we've had some great people present. Great to see these young athletes win and are deserving. So every year, yes, in January, we present the national awards, Stats Perform.
And so obviously it's going to be challenging for the 2020 year, no doubt. If we have a spring season, do you think you'll do one in the spring, or you'll kind of maybe hold off until you do something next year?
I'm almost certain we will, yes. Let's just hope there's a season. We're all pulling for that. We all, want to see the virus, solved. There's no reason not to have, even if it's a shortened season in the spring. These players are deserving. We have a national voting panel that votes on it. Including SWAC and MEAC voters, plenty of them. So, we hope to present come late May.
All right. Well, we'll definitely be looking out, and I know SWAC and MEAC fans as well as fans over at Tennessee State and Hampton, and I know they're always checking out the All-American boards and always comparing and contrasting guys and stuff like that. So it always makes it fun. I want to give you the last word, Craig. Anything that maybe we didn't get to talk about, or maybe mention that you want to share with us, before we conclude?
Well, I mean, Brian, you're a fan just as much as I am of FCS football and college football, but just the FCS just feel, as I mentioned earlier, feels like family. There's so many great players that have come up through this level, go on to NFL careers. Just look at the namesakes of our awards at Stats Perform. I mean, these are the best of the best. So the FCS level, in some ways, it can be a hidden gem to the casual fan. But if you know the FCS, you know the impact and the magnitude of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of prestige and heritage there, and I always say one of the big things for the SWAC is they've held that attendance record for
41 out of 42 years or something like that.
Yeah, so when I think about what the SWAC is doing in terms of their expansion, it's exciting to see where that conference is going. We're going to pray for the MEAC and hope that they're able to continue to build and grow strong. And I'm one of those people, man. I hold out hope that the MEAC and SWAC teams and TSU and Hampton that they can get some games against some of these other FCS powers and win a few of those. I mean, there's talent there's talent at these schools, and so they just got to be able to put it together. So Craig Haley, find on Twitter at Craig Haley, that's CraigHaley, the Stats Perform FCS Senior Editor. Check out his work on fcs.football.com and also on Athlon Sports. And the upcoming preseason poll will be coming out, so that's something to look forward to, and just more stuff for us to debate on. It'll be interesting. I saw at the end of last year, FAMU and North Carolina A&T were in the top 25, so it'll be interesting to see where those two teams fall, and if there's anybody else, maybe Alcorn State, let's see what happens for them or some other teams. So we'll be looking forward to that. Craig, I appreciate your time, and when there's football, I'm hoping we can talk again, but until that time, you and your family be safe.
That's right. We'll talk X's and O's just like we haven't been able to do. But
right, I'm waiting. I'm waiting for that day. We did a 2-hour podcast breaking down a schedule that's going to happen 6 months from now. So I mean, that's how jacked up we were just to see a schedule. So All right.
Well,
Craig,
thank you for having me on, Brian. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. Take care of yourself. All right, bye.
The human voice has always connected audiences with experiences. Major brands all across America have trusted Kever's voice time and time again. Conversational, powerhouse, intelligent, and sincere. That's the voice you need for your creative marketing process. KEAVERSVOICE.com. Kever's Voice, Kever's Voice, KeversVoice.com. Always on, all the time.
Support the Black College Sports Network so we can continue to provide you coverage. Go to myjbn.com/support and be a part of the Black College Sports Network.
Welcome back to the BCSN SportsWrap show. Joining us on this episode for this BCSN SportsWrap conversation is somebody who I've recently started following on Twitter and on YouTube. Has a very interesting podcast that he does, very interesting takes on professional sports. David Shepard. David, how you doing this morning of the Good Shepard podcast? How you doing this morning?
I'm doing good, A.D. Drew. Thank you for having me. Appreciate you reaching out. Respect your attitude, man. As a journalist, someone who's in sports, you're a collaborative guy, man, and we need more of that in the industry. You weren't bargaining for all that. You were just asking how I'm doing, but I did want to get that out there. So thank you for having me.
Well, we appreciate it. We appreciate it. And you've got a podcast. It's not that it's fairly new, at least as far as I know. I just recently discovered it within
right.
During the downtime in sports. That's the best way that I could put it, during this downtime that we've had over the last couple of months
Sure.
due to COVID. So since a lot of my audience probably have no clue as to who you are and what you do, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to go ahead and plug yourself, plug your podcast, and kind of tell everybody what you do on your podcast before we start having our conversation.
Sure. So I am a national sports writer for CBS Sports Radio.com. I write about everything. That's not true at all. I write about basketball, football, and baseball. And if it's like a major, like college football, obviously too. Those are the four major sports in my eyes. Hockey's great, but I believe college football has supplanted that. I'm also a NBA SiriusXM producer. So with the NBA coming back Thursday, it's going to be a very busy time the next few months. It's exciting. And then what you alluded to, A.D. Drew, is with sports, having the significant downtime, I started a YouTube channel. It's called The Good Shepard, and it talks about the most important sports topic. And I don't go too long. I know a lot of podcasts go 58 minutes, an hour, and unless you're Joe Rogan or unless you're Rasheed Wallace, people don't want to listen to what you have to say for 50 minutes to an hour, more than likely. So I'll keep it short, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. What do you need to know? Like you said, I get in, I get out. And if you type in David Shepard, Shepard, the exact spelling you see here, thank you for getting that right, A.D. Drew, Shepard, type in that name, type in Kobe, the great late Kobe Bean Bryant. I will come up on YouTube, and I got a bunch of sports videos. I don't like the word hot takes, just basically the content and the information that you need to know that's going to allow you to move forward in your sports topics and conversation. Hopefully it's insight and numbers that you've never heard before.
All right. And you speak on the late Kobe Bryant, and honestly, this is a little bit of a microcosm as to how this year has gone as far as sports. You know, you had David Stern who passed away coming into the new year. You had Kobe Bryant, then you had the COVID-19, whatever adjective you want to use after COVID-19. We have had it this year. Just kind of talk about you being a professional journalist with all the different things you do with your podcast, with Sirius, with CBS. How has this been as a journalistic profession for you this particular year?
To be transparent, it's been hard. First of all, it's all about perspective right now for me. Like, I'm healthy, I'm safe. My family's been healthy, my family's safe. So just from that regard, I'm very, very fortunate, right, compared to what other people are going through. But with that being said, being in our industry, Drew, it's a hustle, man. And unless you're Stephen A. or Scott Van Pelt, 95, 96% of us, I would say, have multiple jobs in this industry. It's not a high-paying industry. So you got to hustle. And, the reality is I lost a couple jobs, like many of us in this industry. I mean, I still have a couple of them, but it's not the same hours. And so, things will pick up, fortunately. But it's been tough. And so it kind of goes to what you were saying, is how do you make the most of this time? How does anyone make the most of this time? And you got to go into something that's uncomfortable for you. And that's what I did with this YouTube channel. And that's something I'm really excited about. But man, you talk about what's going on right now in our country, man. Watching, are you a baseball fan?
I'm a St. Louis Cardinals fan.
Okay.
I like baseball, but I'm gonna be honest with you. If the Cardinals are not playing, I'm probably not watching because I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. And we're getting back to sports, and it's great to see we're getting to whatever we're gonna call our new normal, at least our new normal for now. That's what I like to call it. You've got NBA in the bubble. You've got baseball outside of the bubble trying to play. You've got the NFL getting ready to try to do what they got to do with training camp, and
right.
that's been a very fluid situation and a moving target. Just give us your thoughts on, we're going to say with the professional ranks right now, just give us your thought on the professional ranks and what they're doing. And we've got the NHL playing north of the border also. So once again, give us your thoughts on the professional ranks right now.
So I may be in the minority in this, but, I'm just grateful for kind of having sports. We didn't even know if baseball would come to fruition. I mean, first, Manfred said it's 100%. Then he said we're not likely to have a season. So just to see guys out there right now competing on the highest level, fans or no fans, that's exciting to me. And it's the same thing with the NBA. I mean, people, Shaq's come out and said, I don't know if there should be a season. Barkley has said, I don't know if there should be a season. So the fact that we are seeing people who do what they do the best in the world, and knowing that it is sports, something that we followed for a lifetime. I know you and me, A.D. Drew, we followed sports from 4 or 5 years old. So it's great. It's absolutely great. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in 2021. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when the new season, hockey, college basketball happens, MLB next year. And I'm fascinated to see what's going to happen with college sports. I'm fascinated because you're going to have this whole population coming back, and you've got thousands of people. If it's, Howard obviously has a huge population. If you talk about like U of M, you got to talk about 50,000 people. So there's going to be some people that rep it for everybody else. So I'm fascinated to see how everything plays out in college football. Yeah. That's the real interest level for me.
Right. And speaking of college football, let's get into the amateurs, and I put air quotes around those amateurs because they don't draw a real paycheck.
Right.
We've had somewhere between, and it's so hard to keep up with the count. I'm not going to even give an accurate number because by the time we edit and put this podcast out, the number will be wrong. I'm just going to say that now. But somewhere between 15 and 20 conferences between NCAA Division, FBS, FCS, Division II, Division III, and NAIA have either postponed, canceled, suspended, or delayed the start of the fall season. Give us your takes on the college landscape in general from where you sit.
I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. If I'm teaching, we talk so much about education right now. If I'm teaching at a school, right, and there's different classrooms, and I say to one classroom, it's dangerous, what's going on around right now, you guys can go home. You don't have to come back for the year. And they happen to be the smartest people with the biggest network, with the most resources, and the other individuals and other classrooms have to stay. Well, that's obviously what is going on right now in college football. In college football specifically, and I know there's other sports, and I'm not downplaying that. I know soccer is a big sport, field hockey, etc. But the biggest cash cow we know is football. There's some schools that it's basketball, but for the most part, it is football. And to have the Ivies say, well, we're going to suspend, and they did it pretty early. And we also saw them do it in the spring, relatively early compared to other conferences, and then everyone else followed suit. What's the message there? What's the message there?
When I look at it, being honest with you, when the Ivy League, who supposedly by reputation are the best and the brightest that we have in America, have Ivy League education. We're talking about doctors, lawyers, businessmen, et cetera, et cetera. When the Ivy League leads the conversation, that ought to tell us something. Correct. Because when you go look for a CEO of your company, if they've got a degree from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, et cetera, they're going to move to the top of the class on the interview list. When you look at medical information, there are certain medical schools that people graduate from, Temple, Meharry, different things like that. When they say something, that's going to move to the top of the list of the reports that you're going to lead. And when the Ivy League not only was the first one to cancel in the springtime, but I believe they were the first. If they weren't the first, they were one of the first to cancel for the fall.
Right.
It should be a signal for everybody to slow down and to really think about the decision that you're going to make.
So yeah, I mean, you alluded to the fact that the Ivies did lead the charge, and we know that. And you did talk about the job list going to the top. That makes total sense. And so why aren't we doing that? And so it really does bother me, because we talk about essential workers in this country, like all of a sudden that's become the hot term. And again, this is my opinion, right? It's the most disposable, right? The most people that are willing to be sacrificed, because they're not getting paid double. They're not getting sick pay. They're not getting COVID. As far as most companies, I can't speak for every company. And so you have the majority of people who are millionaires right now, and they're working from home. They're not going into the office. They're not exposing themselves. They're not putting themselves at risk. They're sitting home and they're millionaires, and they don't have to travel. They don't have to worry about any of that. And meanwhile, people making $15, $17, $18 an hour have to wear masks, while other places in this country don't mandate it, and therefore they're putting themselves even more at risk because there's no federal mandate on masks. And so why am I bringing up, it seems like, politics and policy right now when it comes to college football? Because it's very evident to me that the Ivies are treated, right, with a silver spoon. They have the golden ticket, and they're going to be safe. And they don't have to worry about exposing themselves, because God forbid maybe somebody in the family gets it. And we're not worried about college athletes. That's the mindset at this point, that they're healthy, they have the immune system, they're going to combat it, they're going to fight it. And 99.9% of them, if they get it, it's not going to really impact them significantly. but it's being the carrier. We know all that. But what is the message? Again, it's a terrible message that's happening right now. There needs to be a person with their big boy pants or their big girl pants that is a czar, a leader, a CEO that says, we're not going to have one group do this and then one group do that. And if you're going to have these players play, if you're going to set that up, if you're going to implement that, that's fine. That's fine. I get it. You don't want these players to lose eligibility. They've worked their whole lives to get to this point. College is a special time. Being an amateur athlete, you air quoted it. You're right. That's a special time. But you can't have such division. You can't have such different types of treatment. And that, you talk about a microcosm, Kobe, before, that's a microcosm of what's going on right now in our country. Certain people have to go to work and certain people don't have to go to work. It's the haves and the have-nots, and it's rearing its ugly head right now.
Yeah. And for those of y'all who don't know, David brings a unique point of view. He lives in New York City, where the first epicenter in America was located at, and they have fought through and recovered and have kind of been the model for what happens when you have a outbreak of the pandemic in your area. So before I go into my next question, just kind of talk about what it's been like in New York since March, April, as far as what you've seen directly, because very few people have actually talked to somebody who lives in the middle of it. That's the best way that I could put it.
Right. So full disclosure, I went home to Connecticut in late March to be with my mom and dad, and then I got back in about mid-April. So I was gone for about a month to 5 weeks, but I was back still when it was pretty bad too in April.
Doing the shutdown.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So it was a different city than what we're used to, obviously. I mean, typical New York, you are bunched together on subways. You are bunched together. There is no walking room. If you're in Times Square, you're waiting oftentimes 15, 20 seconds to take a step. I mean, it is that dense. It's that crowded. There were times, especially this is when I first got back to the city from Connecticut, my girlfriend and I, we would be the only two people on an entire avenue. Not
in New York.
In New York City, in Manhattan.
I almost would say I need to see a picture of that, because having lived in New York and been in New York, that's hard to believe, but I understand where you're coming from.
Right, you get the context. I mean, we're talking about a place. It's like Disney World in the population aspect, in the density aspect, how many people are in one space in small proximity. But it was crazy, but at the same time, I'll say this. Obviously we're very mask heavy, but I'm seeing a lot of sloppiness right now. I'm seeing a lot of people take this loose right now in New York. I'm seeing a lot of victory laps right now. And I hope to God this is not the case, and obviously this is the last thing I would want on anyone's life. But do not be surprised if there is a significant second wave in New York City, because there are some people that are just disregarding everything that we're being told. And we need something federal. That's just the bottom line. We need federal mandates. We need something to say, no, this is what you're doing. Why can we get a curfew? Why are we told we have to have a curfew? If we're going to talk about personal liberties, we're being told when we have to be in our house. We can't step outside, but yet we're not told to wear a mask. We're just strongly suggested.
Makes sense. And that mask debate that you just talked about reminds me, Southwestern Athletic Conference Commissioner Charles McClellan was on our show back in April at the genesis of the pandemic and the genesis of the shutdowns. He stated in April, if you want to see college football in the fall, mask up and socially distance.
Right.
In so many words, those were the things that he mentioned. Fast forward 3 months, and what happened? The Southwest Conference, along with the other 3 HBCU conferences, shut football down. Right. Now, all 4 HBCU conferences have postponed, delayed, suspended, whatever adjective you want to use, college football. But not just college football. Most of the HBCUs have postponed fall sports, led first by Houston Tullerson down in Austin, Texas, and then the first football program that was HBCU to suspend was Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. Once again, just like those Ivy League schools that we were talking about, one of the top HBCU medical schools is the Morehouse School of Medicine. So when they say we can't do it, you have to take pause and listen. Just kind of give us your thought on the 4 HBCU conferences just saying we can't do it, be it for whatever reason, be it resources, safety, whatever. We just don't feel comfortable doing it. Just kind of hit on that for us, David.
No, I give them a lot of credit for being forward thinking and give them a lot of credit for doing their research. It's a term we've heard a lot these days, but listening to the science, listening to the medical experts, it's clear where their priorities are. Their priorities is the safety and well-being of the student body and the student body's families that they serve. And I give them all the credit for the world. I don't want to say my hesitancy, but my question would be, well, colleges, universities are based on income. They're based on how you generate revenue, whether that's from alumni, whether it's from gate prices, whether that's from some kind of television sharing distribution. And so I would want to find out more what that compensation would look like and what they're losing, because you don't want to see colleges shut down. It doesn't have to be HBCU, obviously. It could be any college. You don't want any college to shut down, no matter what the budget is. I'm not worried about the Ivy Leagues. The Ivy Leagues have endowment, going back to the 1600s. You worry about the other schools. So I do hope there's a plan for that, because what must go up must come down. And so the question I would have for them is, okay, well, what are you doing to replace what you would be making? But I give them credit for having the priorities straight, for doing the research, for being forward-thinking, clear-thinking. Again, it really bothers me that colleges are not, across the board, are not consistent and steadfast in their approach, and how it seems scattered. It is scattered.
Yeah. And also, speaking of HBCUs, the Southwestern Athletic Conference, once again, was the first conference across the board in any division to actually come out with the framework of a plan on how they anticipate playing in the spring with their 6 conference games, with the option of a 7th game non-conference if someone else chooses to play in the spring, or being able to schedule another opponent who's not on the schedule from within the conference. Right. Once again, they were the first conference across football, period, college football, to come out with the framework of a plan. What has been the talk amongst the media people that you deal with about that plan, and them being the first ones to come out with a plan? Because I know on ESPN, on the Big Boy Network, as we like to call it, they talked to Paul Finebaum, Stephen A. Smith, talked about it. Just kind of give us your take on that.
No, I mean, I think it's about time there's leadership in college football. I mean, you talk about, the games, how it's 6 and potentially 7. I mean, we don't know what the start date's going to be. There's not much to add to that, to be honest with you, A.D. Drew. I mean, they're setting the example. They're setting the example, and they deserve more credit for it. And there is not enough discussion about how they are the leadership. But at the same time, the SEC is going to do what's best for the SEC. I mean, the SEC, you want to talk about the big boys. They're the big boys of college football. The Alabamas, the Floridas, the LSUs, the Auburns. I mean, come on now. I mean, they're not operating under anybody else's measures and guidelines.
As the SEC goes, so does everybody else.
Yeah. They are the last conference that is going to shut down.
Gotcha.
And the only plan they have is, how do we keep these guys on the field? How do we keep our games on TV? And again, this is my opinion. I'm not saying it's a fact, but you can talk about like Mike Gundy, what he was about at, OK State, how he was so insensitive to the well-being of, it seemed like his players. I mean, from a racial standpoint, that's a whole nother conversation, but just the fact that, no, we're going to do what we're going to do, instead of like, hey, we really got to be careful here. to baseball's credit, and you mentioned like the media, what I'm hearing from a lot of the managers is they're really about player empowerment right now. And so it's funny to me because the people that are most being exposed to this are players because they're in closest contact with each other, whether it's football, even baseball, if it's like a stolen base or, a tag at home, whatever the case may be, right? So it is interesting how baseball, people are paying enough attention to this, how player empowered they are right now compared to years past. And the managers are so on the side of players. It's really nice to see. I know I transitioned from college football, but the thing about college football is I don't really hear a lot of players' voices right now. I hear a lot from coaches. I don't hear a lot from players.
And that's probably by design.
It is, yeah. Yeah.
The Creole seasoning is a sodium-free and sugar-free blend that's versatile enough to put on anything. One of the first blends I developed more than 8 years ago, the Creole seasoning has an unmistakable aroma, a bold flavor, and a little heat for character. Every time I open one of these bottles, I hear trumpets and big band music.
It didn't. What happened was a gentleman wanted to do the Black College Sports Network in partnership with the HBCU for these black colleges.
Absolutely.
And it would have educated the Black College Sports Network. This is what he wanted to do. That would have educated a lot of black kids. Okay. That was the real reason why I got into it, was when I saw what happened with the Black College Sports Network, which I.
Last set of questions I want to get you out of here on. Bakura Maker commits to Howard. Mackie Williams says he's going to commit to an HBCU. You've seen this shift in paradigm for the African-American basketball players.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at the P5 schools or group of 5 schools, starting to look more towards the HBCU landscape. And let's be real, a lot of that has to do with the recent Black Lives movement, some of the tragedies that we've seen as far as policing and African Americans, especially that have been brought to the media attention over the last year. But growing up as an African American man, this is something that I've been dealing with for the 48 years that I've been alive. Give us your opinion on that.
You look young, 48. Can I get a birth certificate here?
I actually got a year eligibility left. No, I'm just joking with you. But all seriousness though, do you think that these African American young 17, 18-year-old players going to the Howards, the Alabama states, the HBCUs, do you think that is a short-term trend that's just reactionary, or do you see it that this could be something that's sustainable? And if it is sustainable, is it good? Is it bad? Just kind of get on that, the Black Lives Matter movement. Just get into your opinions on all of the above.
Well, what took so damn long is my thought. What took so damn long? Because if you look at, and I want to be sensitive here, and I want to be respectful here, but it to me, it seems so ridiculous. I'm trying to think of the right word without being professional here. It seems so ridiculous that when you talk about baseball, the 3 main sports in professional sports, baseball, football, basketball, you agree with that, A.D.?
Correct.
Okay. How many owners do we have that are black?
Next question.
Right. So it's Michael Jordan.
That's it.
And the only reason and I'm talking about majority ownership, and the only reason that he is the owner is because this is the greatest athlete in the history of. So when we talk about Michael Jordan, he is the only black owner in professional sports. I don't think, without even knowing, but I'm almost 99%. There's not a black owner in the NHL. So you're talking about the 4 major sports. That is
125 franchises between the 4.
Correct. So that's 0.07. That's 0.75% of ownership is black. Yet, if you look at football and basketball, the majority of the athletes are black.
Over 70%.
Right. Now, name me the last time. In all seriousness, name me the last time there was a great white NBA point guard.
Steve Nash or John Stockton would be the two that I would come up with.
Right. And so Steve Nash was a rookie 24 years ago, right? And he didn't even grow up in the States.
Yeah,
So,
he's Canadian.
right, exactly. So there needs to be a real conversation. And I'm saying this as a white person, right? There needs to be a real conversation about how we put HBCU schools more on the map. Because I got to tell you something, and I listen, and this isn't great on my part, but I can't name you the HBCU schools. I can't. I'm somewhat intelligent. It's not by not wanting to know. It's just, it's not in my wheelhouse. It's not put out in mainstream society. Now, I can tell you about Tobacco Road. I can tell you about Duke. I can tell you about North Carolina. I can tell you about UCLA. And so why? And so the concept is, it's from a bird's eye view, right? It's black players in college basketball and white ownership in the NBA. And so the black community, it's really important that they give HBCU schools the best of possible. Now, there are a lot of white owners, by the way, in the NBA, specifically Mark Cuban, that are all about diversity and quality. But that has to start at the collegiate level.
San Antonio Spurs are another good example.
Greg Popovich is a great man. He is. You want to talk about a guy that's so BLM, Black Lives Matter. Greg Popovich. Oh my God. I'm surprised he didn't quit mid-season to work with the chapters in Black Lives Matter, man. That's how passionate and fervent he seems to be about this. But A.D. Drew, as someone that is in college athletics, and I'm being long-winded here, but it really is such an important topic. Do you see guys like LeBron, Chris Paul, Melo, Wade, so socially conscious, getting together with college athletes and saying, hey, guys, we need to think about going here. We should be supporting black schools. We need to be giving them exposure because they're not on ESPN. They're not on CBS during the tournament. And I just want to know your thoughts about that.
I really do think. I grew up when I was in college. When I started college, the Fab Five were the big thing. You know, I was in that high school to transition from the UNLV, Duke, Fab Five. You know, that's when I was leaving high school, going into college. The Fab Five: Chris Webber, Juwan Howard, Jalen Rose, Jimmy King, and why am I drawing a blank now for number 5? But anyway, the 5 of them very easily could have went to a Florida A&M, where I'm an alma mater of, North Carolina A&T, Alabama State. Matter of fact, a guy who was a point guard with Chris Webber in high school actually went to Florida A&M, where I went to school at, and was our point guard for 4 years at Florida A&M University. So I know Chris Webber, at least I heard of him, because that's your point guard. You know, your point guard is your leader. I'm guaranteeing you that he told Chris that he was going to Florida A&M while Chris decided to sign with Duke. With Michigan. Right. And let's be real. You're not going to get the $100 handshake at Florida A&M or Alabama State or North Carolina A&T or Southern that you're going to get at a Michigan, at you name any Power 5 school where you're going to get those $100 handshakes.
Sure.
And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you know nothing about college sports right now. It's an unwritten rule. It's a taboo thing you don't talk about. But hey, I'm not coaching college ball anymore. I can talk about it. Right. But yeah, those 5 could have very easily have done it. And I would love to see a Howard or any other HBCU sign a class of 3, 4, or 5 4 to 5 star athletes and make that run during March Madness.
Sure.
I would love to see it. You know, The closest thing we've ever seen to that, you have to go back to Texas Wesleyan, 1963, when they won the championship. But that was a white school with the first to put 5 black players on the court to start in the finals. And then the 6th and the 7th man were also African American. Yes, that was done intentional. There were white players who were good on that team, but that was done intentional to prove a point to Adolph Rupp. But wouldn't it be great for America, especially people who look like me, to see one of our schools, one of the 89 schools that play basketball on the Division I or Division II level or the NAIA level, make it to those championships? We've had it happen in Division II with Virginia Union. We've had it happen in Division II with the Tuskegee, who's made it to the Elite Eight, and a few other schools. But on the Division I level, I would love to see it. I would love to see a SWAC team or a MEAC team not be playing on Tuesday night in Dayton, Ohio, or Wednesday night in Dayton, Ohio, in the first 4, as they like to call it, or the first round of the tournament that they've renamed it so many times.
Right.
No, I would love to see us with the top 4 seed in a particular pod.
Right, absolutely.
Will it happen? It can happen if the athletes go there, because in today's age, yes, ESPN, CBS Sports, Fox Sports, they're good, but you don't need those today. This platform that you and I are on right now will get you just as many views as anything else. Why did we know about Zion Williamson 2 years before he stepped on campus at Duke? YouTube.
Yep.
Enough said.
2 words that have changed television and movies forever.
Correct.
They have totally changed the landscape of everything. And you're right. You're 100% right. You look at, I mean, it's a different example. It's a little bit different, but Ben Simmons at LSU. I mean, nobody goes to LSU. Nobody goes to LSU anymore. You know what I mean? And Ben Simmons was the guy. It wasn't like a John Morant where like he was just overlooked, or like Steph Curry where he was just overlooked, or Dame Lillard where he went to like, Weber State. Like Ben Simmons was the guy. And so and he was still the number 1 draft pick, because if you're good, they'll find you.
Correct.
They'll find you. Like Michael Olowokandi, I think he went to Pacific. They'll find you. You know? Absolutely agree with that. Penny Hardaway, Memphis State.
Well, I knew Penny, having grown up in the area, but Penny was the man when I was in high school.
Man, you talk about a guy that was, he was all NBA first team. In his 2nd and 3rd season, Michael Jordan was wearing pennies.
One game only.
I mean, that's like LeBron James deciding to say, you know what, I want to wear this rookie shoes. That's Michael Jordan.
Right.
Oh, right. Man, if they wouldn't have had, that's a whole new topic. But if they didn't have Brian Hill, if they had like someone like a Larry Brown or someone like a Pat Riley, man, that team would have stayed together.
Right. And I'm gonna throw 2 names out on you who I actually saw play in high school, who are from the area where you are. I saw Kenny Anderson play in high school.
Oh yeah.
I saw Stephon Marbury play in high school.
Oh yeah. Coney Island.
Yes.
So
I saw those 2 play. Speaking of YouTube, David, once again, tell everybody. We're gonna give you an opportunity to get the last take on this podcast, and then I want you to tell everybody where they can find you, how they can subscribe. Give yourself the plug. Go ahead, last take, and then your plug.
Sure. Well, last take in terms of
anything you want to get off your chest.
Anything
you want to get off your chest. This is your time.
Well, no, I mean my last take is A.D. Drew, I want to commend you for what you do. Working in college athletics, you guys are underpaid. I consider you an educator. And I just wish that in our society we had better pay for educators and less pay for those who are, making billions of dollars off of a graph, off of an ebb and flow chart. And I think we need to be really looking and examining what happened with this pandemic. I think we need to have our eyes open with what happened with George Floyd. And you mentioned before, and it was very on point and poignant and important. It is the movement for going to HBCU schools something temporary, or is it something permanent? And we can't let what's happened in our society the last 6 months with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, we can't let that just go in the wind and be the flavor of the month. We can't let that happen. This has to be permanent change. Permanent. And times need to change. And to be honest, they should have changed a long time ago. But we know where we are now. And my thing is we have to treat each other as human beings. And we have to treat each other with respect. And it's not right that there's minimum wage workers going into work right now making $15 an hour. And most of the people that are making millions of dollars in this country are sitting in comfortable HBCU homes. And I just hope people watching your platform, look at something like what you're doing and respect and admire you. Not the people that are, on TV, on Netflix. Let's spend more time focused on how we can help people instead of binge watching something on a Saturday. We're having a guilty pleasure watching 90 Day Fiancé. So that would be the last take that I would have that's meaningful, that's beyond sports. But yeah, in terms of YouTube, AD Drew, and I would want you to do this for me, and I would be glad to do this for you. If there's anybody that's interested in sports, this is free content. I'm not looking for a dime. I just want people to hear what I have to say because I'm 33 years old. I've been in sports, working in sports for over 10 years. I have perspective. There's things I'm going to share that are going to be good content and compelling. Subscribe to my channel. I'm going to come out with something every single week, 4 to 5 minutes. What is it that you have to know about sports, and why is it important? Why is that important? Why is that more than just sports? What can we take from that specific situation, incident, circumstance, and make the most of? So that's my main thing. I don't know what the algorithm is about. I'm not smart enough to know it, but I do know if you type in David Shepard, S-H-E-P-A-R-D, David Shepard, even though it sounds like a promo, S-H-E-P-A-R-D, and type in Kobe, I will come up. My channel will not. I don't know why, because of a movie called The Good Shepard, but if you type in D-A-V-I-D, S-H-E-P-A-R-D, Kobe, I will come up. Subscribe, like, share, but most importantly, I hope you guys take something from it.
Follow the Black College Sports Network on social media at MyBCSN1, the number 1, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at MyBCSN1.
But you stay hard.